My stepfather charged me $350 per month, at 15, kicked me out with 45 days notice, then demanded $225,000 of my $520,000 lottery win. At the age of 13, my mother married Mark Caldwell. He entered our home, occupied the master bedroom, and established rules. He is the head of his household. He claims it. Not his home. My mother's house. My deceased father gave it to her. Mark Caldwell acted as if he owned everything after ringing her. I addressed him as, "Sir." Set a time of 8:30 p.m. weekend curfew. He chastised me for overeating. He labeled me a financial strain. When I was 15, my dad charged $350 per month in rent. Was in high school. To pay him, I worked in fast food. Mum did not speak. Mark Caldwell was never mentioned. She looked down at the floor and said it would teach me responsibility. I worked 28 summer and 18 school hours. I paid Mark Caldwell on a monthly basis. I never missed. He never said thank you. He never said he was proud of me. He kept the money, claiming I was learning real-world skills. Mark Caldwell granted me 45 days to leave on my 19th birthday, 3 weeks after graduation. He declared me an adult. He desired privacy with Mom. I had been his guest long enough. Mom cried, but did not defend me. She handed me $250 and packed my belongings without Mark Caldwell noticing. I stayed with an elderly woman across town. I attended community college nights while working full-time in a warehouse. I did not bother my parents or Mark Caldwell. No money, assistance, or advice. I resolved everything. I learned how to file taxes, repair a car, and budget for food in college. It takes 5 years to graduate. I became an accountant. Not flashy, but solid. Excellent compensation, benefits, and opportunities for advancement. My own apartment, then a condominium. I lived without Mark Caldwell or his mother. I saw them twice per year. Thanksgiving and Mother's birthday. Mark Caldwell frequently criticized my work, car, and clothing. Accountants bored him. He suggested I start a business. His failing landscaping company squandered my mother's money. Of course, I made bad decisions. I stopped caring about his words. I smiled, helped my mother wash the dishes, and quickly left. 4 months ago I won the lottery. Not a mega jackpot, but plenty. $520,000 post-tax. Initially I remained quiet. My apartment is fully paid. A lot was saved, just purchased a car. Dependable and not flashy. I donated some to a shelter that assisted me when I was 20 and unemployed. 1 month later I told my mother. "Keep it between us," I said. Should have known better. That night she informed Mark Caldwell. He called the following morning. He didn't congratulate me or express his happiness. He requested lunch. A discussion of family finances was suggested. I should have declined, but I was intrigued. I desired his face-to-face response. We met at his neighborhood diner. His appearance was the same. I wore the same polo shirt, arrogant grin, and stared like I was 15 again while renting. He was effective. He stated that lottery prizes should be fair. He calls himself the family patriarch. He claimed my mother worked hard to raise me. He advised me to share the luck. His goal was $225,000. A lump sum was requested. He wanted to expand his landscaping business. He referred to it as the family's future investment. I asked for his family's definition. Mom, him and I. We formed a bond. Supporting one another was critical. I reminded him that I was expelled at 19. I was told to mature. I reminded him that he had never helped me with college, my first apartment, or anything. I was labeled a kid for scoring. Then he became enraged. He called me selfish. My greed embarrassed my mother, he said. He stated that my family would not respect me if I kept the money. As housekeeper, he had final say over finances. He believed that his marriage to my mother gave him control over her bank accounts. Allow him to talk for another 12 minutes. He had planned a new business vehicle, a trip for him and his mother, or a boat. He pretended the money was his, and I was just a minor impediment to his shopping spree. I refused him after he had stopped. In 3 seconds, his face turned red. His voice rose. We were being watched by other tables. He said I was ungrateful and selfish. He said, "Family takes care of family." I ignored my mother's advice. I spoke steadily. I reminded him that I was expelled at the age of 19. Since then I have supported myself. I told him that we define family differently. The jaw tightened. He held the table edge in his hands. It was hard for him to respond. He switched tactics quickly. He dropped his voice, almost mournfully. Money has ruined our relationship. He mentioned that she missed her daughter. I took note of his meeting call. I claimed he demanded cash. His hand struck the table. Silverware jumped. Several people looked. I had just 10 days to decide what kind of daughter I wanted. He stood up and left. His coffee was free. I waited another minute before paying the bill and leaving. I made it to my car before shaking. I waited for 25 minutes in the parking lot with the steering wheel. Someone told me that this would happen. I anticipated Mark Caldwell's attempt. I was so furious hearing him say that and demand my money as if he deserved it that I couldn't think straight. Start the car and head to my condominium. Straight to my laptop. I spent the entire evening researching family finances and legal rights. I read that relatives won the lottery. Cease and desist letters and harassment laws were discussed. I noted. Saved websites. Information and strategy were helpful. That night around 9, my phone rang. Mom. When I replied, she spoke softly and contritely. Mark Caldwell was unhappy, she stated. She requested my help. Her words expressed my concern, but not sufficiently. Why did she inform Mark Caldwell about the lottery, despite my advice? A moment of silence. She claims she tells her husband everything. People do this during their marriages. Saying it broke my heart, she said. So I told her that my condo was paid off. Saying I saved for the future. I donated to charity. There was no gift for Mark Caldwell. Her tears began. She claimed I split the family over money. She said I had changed. She said I was nice before. I told her I rented at 15. I was expelled at the age of 19. I corrected her. Nothing about me has changed except now I have money and Mark Caldwell wants it. She let out a cry. I hung up. The next morning, I looked up family and financial protection lawyers. I found Evelyn Harper. According to her website, she helped customers protect their assets from family pressure. I scheduled an afternoon appointment with her office. Everything in her office had been described. My mother's call, Mark Caldwell's $225,000 demand, and the diner meeting. Evelyn Harper took frequent notes. Dates and details were noted. She questioned Mark Caldwell's claims and my mother's involvement. After I finished, she looked up and said, "This happens more than people think. We need to protect my assets right away." Evelyn Harper advised me to record everything. I recall every interaction with Mark Caldwell, as well as my mother's money calls and texts. In case things got worse, she said, if Mark Caldwell tries to make legal threats or harasses me, I'll need a clear record of everything. That night I began keeping detailed records at home. I documented the entire restaurant experience. Mark Caldwell demanded an exact amount, slapping his palm on the table. I logged times and dates. Michael Brooks, my accountant, came 3 days later. I told both my mother and Mark Caldwell. I restructured my finances with Michael Brooks. Enhanced security. His beneficiary lists do not include Mark Caldwell. This was observed by Michael Brooks. Families claim lottery winnings. Legal documentation is the best protection I can get. He exited his office safely. I had attorneys, accountants and paperwork. Was shielded. Mark Caldwell called 4 days after dinner. His gentle, sensible tone made the restaurant dispute appear unreal. I overreacted, he admitted. He wants $60,000 to expand the business. Just enough to stabilize, he said. I am not giving him any money. Please stop contacting me about this. I spoke forcefully. His tone shifted abruptly. The friendly voice left. He said, I'd regret it. He thought I was very wrong. His family remembers treachery. He spoke louder with each phrase. I advised him not to threaten me. I record everything he says. I hung up. Again my hands tremble. However, I felt stronger than at the diner. Now I have lawyers. Was shielded. I proved his actions. The next morning my phone lit up with a text from my mother. 3 more followed. I read pages about how difficult opening mail was. She claimed that her landscaping company lost money every month. Mark Caldwell worked 13-hour days to keep everything running, she said. She despised seeing him exhausted and irritable at home. She believed the company would be fine with some assistance during this difficult time. She never mentioned cash. She never asked directly. But every word was intended to shame me. Each statement was intended to make me feel bad about not sharing my money with Mark Caldwell and my mother. Read each text twice. I took a screenshot on my phone. My documentation folder held them. I remained silent. I returned to work with my phone facing down on my desk. 3 days later, I met Daniel Reed for lunch at a bistro near work. Daniel Reed and I collaborated for 4 years. I told him about my bad dates, car problems, and annoying midnight drummer neighbor. I didn't tell him much about my family. I mentioned my mother frequently. I mentioned that my stepfather and I did not get along. I never told the entire story. That day I told him about Mark Caldwell charging me rent at 15, being kicked out at 19, working my way through college on my own, winning the lottery and demanding $225,000 as if it was his right, and my mother's guilt trip texts every morning. Daniel Reed stared at me after he dropped his sandwich. He denied knowledge. He assumed I had the typical distant relationship with my parents. His feelings toward Mark Caldwell and my mother were negative. He asked about my plans. I told them I wouldn't give. I had a lawyer and documented everything. That was clever, said Daniel Reed. He then said something that helped me feel less alone than I had in weeks. He agreed to help if Mark Caldwell returned. He advised me not to face this alone. Really, thank you. I was reviewing spreadsheets at work 10 days after the diner meeting when my desk phone rang. The receptionist was downstairs. Her voice lacked confidence. She mentioned that my stepfather wanted to meet in the foyer. My heart sped up. I asked her to repeat. She said my stepfather, Mark Caldwell, was here to talk about something important. I told her I wasn't available. Request his departure. She replied, okay. And the line went dead. Nothing appeared on my computer screen. My hands shook. Mark Caldwell stopped by my office. He drove up to my office and entered the lobby like a pro. I was shocked by its brazenness. The receptionist called back 6 minutes later. She sounded uneasy now. She claimed Mark Caldwell would not leave. She claimed he demanded 6 minutes to discuss family issues with his daughter. What should she do? I told her to call management. I reported him for harassment and asked him to leave. Someone held me. Voices in the background. My boss called to see what was wrong. I politely explained that my stepfather had arrived unexpectedly and would not leave. My manager said he would handle it and then hung up. I was frozen at my desk for 12 minutes. I was preoccupied at work. Mark Caldwell may cause a lobby disturbance. My coworkers saw this and knew my story. The manager came to my desk. The man said Mark Caldwell had left. He strongly advised Mark Caldwell to leave and wait for security. Mark Caldwell protested briefly, citing a family issue. Eventually, he left. He left shouting, telling everyone in the foyer that I couldn't avoid him forever. The manager asked if I was all right. Despite not being present, I agreed. He stated that if Mark Caldwell returned, they would immediately notify the police. After thanking him, my hands shook as I worked. I felt embarrassed. My floor mates all knew. The accounting department was small. Several people spoke. I emailed Evelyn Harper to explain. Within an hour, she responded. She labeled it harassment and demanded an immediate cease and desist letter. She considered visiting my office after I told him to stop talking about money as a boundary violation. She asked me to write the letter. Certainly wrote back. I allowed her to send whatever she wanted. Part of me was relieved. Although legal action protected me, I was concerned about what Mark Caldwell would do if he received a lawyer's letter. Is it helpful or harmful? My phone rang this evening. My mom. Though I almost didn't respond, I knew she'd keep calling. Picked up. She began crying before I spoke. She claimed I threw Mark Caldwell out of my office like a criminal. I was ruining him, she said. She claimed I embarrassed a nice man who wanted to speak to me in public. Stop her. Intruder Mark Caldwell came to my workplace. I told him to leave through the receptionist because I wasn't available. I blamed him for refusing and complaining. Crying continued. She said I had changed. She called me cold and harsh. She stated that her daughter would never treat family in this manner. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell her that her 15-year-old daughter had paid rent and been discharged at the age of 19. But I said I had to leave and hung up. The following day, I sought out family dynamics therapists. I found Lauren Richards. According to her website, she helped clients set boundaries with difficult family members. I scheduled a weekend appointment by phone. She smiled and showed me a comfortable chair in her office. She questioned why I had come in. I mentioned Mark Caldwell and the lottery. Back to being 13, Mark Caldwell moving in, paying rent in high school, being kicked out, my mother never standing up for me, and this 17-year cycle of her preferring him over me. I cried halfway through. I cried uncontrollably. Lauren Richards handed me a Kleenex and waited. She said something powerful when I paused. She stated that my mother's passivity was not passive. She said, every time my mom stood by and let Mark Caldwell treat me badly, that was an active choice. She prioritized her comfort over mine. She stated that it was difficult to accept, but necessary to see. I nodded. It never occurred to me. I always thought my mother was weak or afraid of Mark Caldwell. Lauren Richards is right. Mom chose. She always chose Caldwell. 4 days later, Evelyn Harper called to say the cease and desist letter had been certified. She read me important information over the phone. It stated that Mark Caldwell should stop asking for money. He was instructed to avoid my home and office. Attorneys were responsible for future communication. The letter had a serious tone. Evelyn Harper stated that Mark Caldwell must sign it to prove receipt. I felt safe with this official document. As if I had drawn a line with implications. I was sad too. It should not. Families should not have to hire lawyers. Mom called back 3 days later. She claimed the legal letter crippled Mark Caldwell. She stated that he felt assaulted, dejected, and angry. She claimed I ruined her marriage and heart. How could I have been so cruel to my father? Inhaled deeply. Mark Caldwell did not raise me. I claimed he had evicted me, charged rent, and demanded money. I told Mark Caldwell he couldn't accept my boundaries, which ended their marriage. She wept again. She said I divided the family. I claimed Mark Caldwell kicked me out 17 years ago, destroying the family. My call has ended. The next morning my mother invited me to dinner at her house. She suggested family discussions. Mark Caldwell promised common sense, she stated. They wanted a compromise that everyone could accept, she explained. I contemplated the paragraph. I knew immediately that this was wrong. Lauren Richards informed me that I didn't owe Mark Caldwell another talk in our final session. She suggested I set my boundaries and that eating this meal would give him another chance to influence me. A part of me wished to trust Mom. Part of me wanted to communicate and reach an agreement. My mother might finally defend me, I thought. I texted back and offered to come to dinner one night to have a productive conversation. Mom replied instantly with a heart emoji and 6:30 Saturday. Already regretting accepting. Too fast Saturday. I checked my documentation file 4 times in the morning to ensure organization. Bank statements, cease and desist letter, Evelyn Harper's business card, text message screenshots. Instead eating supper with my mother, I felt like I was preparing for trial. I informed Daniel Reed about the strategy by text around midday. He promised to drive over if things went nasty if I called him. Having someone on my side made it less terrifying. I parked on the street instead of the driveway at my mother's house before 6:30 so I could go fast. As usual, the home looked the same. Same beige siding, same immaculate flower gardens my mother tended, same front door I'd passed through 1,000 times as a youngster. Walking up to it, I felt 13 again. I was weak and waited for Mark Caldwell to tell me what I did wrong. I knocked instead of using my old key. My mother replied immediately, beaming like I'd given her a present by showing up. I noticed her scent from my childhood as she hugged me. She took me inside and showed me Mark Caldwell at the dining table. The table's head chair was my father's. For 17 years he'd sat there like he owned the home. My mother arranged the table with her special holiday delicacies. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes and green beans were served in bowls. My mother signaled me to sit with shaky hands. I chose the chair farthest from Mark Caldwell. He nodded but didn't stand or shake my hand. While my mother brought buns and filled our glasses, we sat awkwardly silent. She was moving too fast and frightened, filling the stillness with plates and cutlery. "Pass the potatoes," Mark Caldwell said. I gave them. He inquired about job. I said okay. Asked whether my condo required repairs. No, I replied. My mother continued adding food to my plate like I was a teenager. She inquired about my automobile, neighbors and sleep. Small chat like going across a minefield. Every inquiry seemed laden, like we were waiting for someone to express what we were actually talking about. Mark Caldwell ate gently, cutting chicken precisely. He praised my mother's food. He said the landscaping firm had some new customers. He discussed weather. It appeared normal, but I could sense the stress. My mother's grin was too brilliant. Mark Caldwell's tone was too soothing. Food was scarcely tasted. My mom cleared plates after we ate. Mark Caldwell cleared his throat and reclined. He apologized for his behavior at the diner and my office. He stated the firm was failing and he caught himself up in worry. He appreciated my decision to build my own life. He seemed to have practiced the words. My mother nodded from the kitchen doorway, encouraging him. The apology was appreciated, so I waited. I anticipated more. Mark Caldwell folded his hands on the table and stated he understood my stance but that family should support family in distress. After much deliberation, he no longer wanted the original sum. He stated $30,000 was enough to save and stabilize the firm. My mother sat at the table again. She said it wasn't about Mark Caldwell's pride. This was for her safety. She explained the business supported them and would hurt her if it failed. She wondered if I wouldn't defend my mother. I suppressed the shame of being responsible for my mother's pleasure. I told them I volunteered to support my mother directly years ago when I started my accounting career and had considerable savings. I told her she declined because Mark Caldwell claimed they didn't need my help. I wouldn't give them money anymore, especially for Mark Caldwell's failed business. Mark Caldwell's face darkened, jaw clenched, and table-edge hands tightened. Mummy looked like she may weep. It was different, she said. That was before the worst. Mark Caldwell called me unreasonable. He stated I no longer valued $30,000. Little dent in my stash. He stated I chose money over family. His next statement chilled me. He stated I was cold and greedy with money like my father. He realized that was a low blow. My father gave my mother the house to protect her and ensure she always had a roof, and Mark Caldwell had been renting it for 17 years and acting like he owned it. I rose. I stated supper was done and we wouldn't talk money again. My mother grabbed my arm, dug into my sleeve and begged me not to go furious. She stated we were family and could resolve this by talking. Mark Caldwell stood. He stated leaving that door would make me an outcast in this household. He said I'd regret ignoring them. I freed my arm from my mother. I told Mark Caldwell I'd been an outsider since he expelled me at 19. For 13 years, I'd been figuring this out alone. My mother pleaded as I approached the door. I fled without looking back. I sat in my car for 12 minutes before driving, shaking the steering wheel. For 3 weeks my phone was a war. Tuesday evening my aunt called. She stated she heard I got money and wouldn't help my mother. She stated families should remain together. She implied I abandoned my mother on purpose and was nasty. 4 days later, my cousin contacted me wondering whether I was letting Mark Caldwell lose his business out of spite. My superiority was always his belief. My mother's friend called to see if she might help me see reason. Contact after contact showed that Mark Caldwell was spreading his story. Everyone heard I was greedy and ruthless. He left out the bit when he booted me out, charged me rent as a teenager, and showed up at my employment. Directly contacted my aunt. I phoned her back to discuss. I detailed history. I told her about paying rent at 15, being booted out 3 weeks after graduation, working my way through college without support, and Mark Caldwell seeking $225,000. She stopped talking on the other end. Her voice changed as she talked. She denied knowing those information. She claimed Mark Caldwell made me appear greedy with unexpected money and that he and my mother had always supported me. I wanted her to tell other family members who'd contacted me the truth. Said she would. Some family members apologized after hearing the whole tale. My cousin phoned back to apologize for assuming. My mother's friend texted that she now understood my boundaries, while others supported Mark Caldwell. My uncle stated family supports family despite previous problems. Another aunt advised me to grow up and forgive. Some cousins stopped answering my texts. I was sad yet unsurprised. They weren't there throughout the terrible years. They hadn't seen me pay Mark Caldwell rent by working fast food at 15. They didn't assist when I slept on an air mattress in a leased room. I ate ramen to afford textbooks and they didn't provide anything. But now they had money advice. Contact with extended family that didn't respect my limits decreased. Without knowing the number, I stopped answering. Recurring group talks about the problem were silenced. I concentrated on my supporters. Daniel Reed, Evelyn Harper, Lauren Richards. The folks who knew the full story but supported me. Daniel Reed brought me to a quiet Italian restaurant on the opposite side of town where I could breathe. He got us both wine without asking and instructed me to choose from the menu. I wasn't hungry, but I ordered spaghetti since he seemed anxious and I didn't want him to think I was coming apart. He let me converse in a corner booth away from others. I told him about the extended family calls, allegations, and how Mark Caldwell was twisting things to portray me as the villain. Daniel Reed patiently listened, and after I ended talking, he said something that made me cry at the table. He adds, I survived being kicked out at 19 with nothing but $250 and a rented room. He adds, I worked through 5 years of college while supporting myself completely alone. He adds, I built a career and bought a condo and made a life that was stable and good. He adds, the lottery money was pure luck, just random chance, and I didn't owe Mark Caldwell a single dollar of it. He adds, Mark Caldwell didn't help me study, didn't help me move, didn't celebrate when I graduated, didn't do anything a real parent does. Daniel Reed advised me to quit letting guilt consume me when I had nothing to feel bad about. His outside perspective benefited more than he realized. Because family conflict makes it hard to see clearly. That night I felt stronger. Like maybe I wasn't as bad as Mark Caldwell was making me out to be. Things quieted a month after the family supper. Too quiet. I should have known Mark Caldwell wasn't done. But I hoped he'd quit. An unfamiliar number called, and I almost didn't answer. The caller identified himself as Thomas Keller, Mark Caldwell's landscaping firm partner. He apologized for calling me unexpectedly but worried about Mark Caldwell and my mother. My stomach fell since business partners rarely call the family unless something is serious. Thomas Keller said that Mark Caldwell used my mother's own funds for company purposes. He said Mark Caldwell continued promising to turn around the landscaping firm but it lost money every month. Thomas Keller saw the bank statements because Mark Caldwell required him to co-sign, and they were awful. Really terrible. Thomas Keller said, "My mother's savings were disappearing into a failing business and she might not even know how much was gone." I could tell he was stressed. He wanted out of the partnership since Mark Caldwell's financial decisions were risky and he didn't want legal exposure if everything crashed. He claimed desperate individuals make risky choices like Mark Caldwell. Thomas Keller warned me that Mark Caldwell's business failures may endanger my mother's finances. He didn't want my money or involvement. He believed a family member should know what was happening. I thanked him for calling and appreciated the caution. I phoned Evelyn Harper shortly after we hung up. On the second ring, she answered and I explained Thomas Keller's message. Evelyn Harper paused and inquired about my mother's house, which my father left her. I told her my mom owned it without a mortgage since my dad paid it off before he died. Evelyn Harper thought that was excellent since Mark Caldwell couldn't mortgage the house without my mother's signature, but he may be pressing her. Evelyn Harper advised me to examine county property records online for liens on the house. After she showed me how to access public records, I spent the evening browsing through materials I hardly understood. Except for the original deed transfer from my father to my mother and property tax documents. It seemed regular. I found something from 3 weeks ago. Mark Caldwell sought to get a home equity line of credit on my mother's house. Applicants requested $90,000 against the property and public records. Reading the information made my hands shake. My mother applied for the house my father left her, but I knew she would never risk it unless Mark Caldwell pushed her. I screenshot everything and sent Evelyn Harper a message wondering what it meant. She replied within minutes that the application existed but needed to be authorized. I couldn't sleep that night worrying about Mark Caldwell taking everything my father gave my mother forever. I instantly contacted my mother the next morning. On the fourth ring, she replied tiredly, and I directly inquired if Mark Caldwell was trying to mortgage the house. I heard her breathing on the other end as she quieted. She ultimately revealed that Mark Caldwell stated it was the only way to rescue the firm and their future when I gently inquired again. Felt nauseous. I advised her not to jeopardize her only security, her house, for Mark Caldwell's failing firm. She stated I didn't understand the strain she was under to support Mark Caldwell, her husband. I informed her that my father left her the house so she'd always have a home. I don't. She cried, and stated Mark Caldwell promised to bring the firm around with one more opportunity. She stated she signed the paperwork but the bank hadn't accepted it. Her willingness to risk everything broke my heart. I breathed and tried to relax. I offered to pay for my mother to meet with a financial expert who could assess her position without Mark Caldwell. I told her she needed to see the true statistics, how much money was gone, and how dangerous she was. She rejected instantly. She trusted Mark Caldwell to handle family financial decisions and thought it would be a betrayal of her spouse. Hearing this was unbelievable. I questioned her how self-defense was a betrayal. I was attempting to separate her from Mark Caldwell, she claimed. I tried to help her maintain the house my father left her, but she stated I didn't understand marriage and compromise. I quit up after 25 minutes of circling. I informed her the offer stood if she changed her mind. I stopped the conversation before saying something regrettable. I was heartbroken that she was risking her financial future with Mark Caldwell. 3 days later, I broke down on Lauren Richards' sofa during therapy. I told her everything about the house, Mark Caldwell's mortgage effort and my mother's refusal. Lauren Richards listened and said something hurtful but necessary. I cannot save my mother from choices she's actively making. My mother is an adult who is choosing to stay with Mark Caldwell and risk her financial security, and I have to accept that I can't control that. Lauren Richards said I could offer help and resources, but I couldn't force her to take them, and pushing would hurt me without changing anything. They added, the hardest part of loving someone is watching them make bad choices and knowing you can't stop them. I sobbed much of the session because accepting it felt impossible. I wanted to protect my mother as she never did. Lauren Richards is right. My mother made her own decisions, and I had to let her suffer, even if it cost her money. My mother and Mark Caldwell both remained silent for 3 weeks. On Tuesday morning, my mother called me early. Something compelled me to respond. I had difficulty understanding her because she was crying so hard. She claimed that the bank declined the home equity line of credit due to Mark Caldwell's low credit score and poor business finances. She sounded both relieved and scared. She was relieved when the bank declined because she was worried about endangering the house, but she was now concerned about Mark Caldwell. I gently asked her if staying with someone who could endanger her home was safe. She quickly accused me of distorting facts and misrepresenting Mark Caldwell, who was simply attempting to save their future. I assured her that a lover would not force her to risk the house my father had left her. She interrupted me to say that I did not understand their marriage. She hung up before I could finish. I got a call from my mother 12 minutes later. I assumed she was calling to apologize, but it was Mark Caldwell. He spoke quickly and harshly, shivering with rage. He claimed I poisoned the bank, sabotaged his business, and attempted to end his marriage with my mother. I explained to him that the bank's decision was based on his finances and credit score, not mine. He called me a liar and claimed I called the bank to deny the loan. I told him that banks don't work that way and to stop contacting me. He yelled at me, saying I was ruining everything and that I would pay the consequences. I reminded him that I had nothing to do with the bank and that he needed to stop blaming me for his mistakes. He said it wasn't over and hung up. I felt cold when Mark Caldwell said something. He threatened to sue me for family contributions. After I made money, he claimed I owed him for housing me from the ages of 13 to 19. He said he kept receipts and records for everything he spent on me, and I would repay it with interest. It was ridiculous legally, but Mark Caldwell sounded serious, so I was terrified. I told him to try, but no lawyer would take the case. He said his attorney would call, then hung up. My hands shook when I opened my phone's voice recorder app and saw that I had recorded the entire call. I immediately sent the recording to Evelyn Harper, asking if Mark Caldwell's threat was legal. She called me within an hour to discuss the next steps because Mark Caldwell was acting dangerously. After receiving the recording, Evelyn Harper called me within 25 minutes. She waited until she had finished listening without interrupting to speak. She claimed Mark Caldwell had no legal claim to my lottery winnings and that his threat was pure intimidation. She stated that he could not claim parenting expenses years later, even if he had been my legal guardian, which he was not because my mother had full custody. He illegally charged me rent while I was a minor, so using it to demand money now was ridiculous. She also warned us not to take his threat lightly because desperate people act desperate. She advised us to use her law firm to respond formally and halt any legal proceedings. She sent Mark Caldwell a letter explaining why he had no claim and warning that frivolous lawsuits would result in harassment and legal fees. I granted her permission to send immediately. We sent the letter via certified mail 3 days later to ensure Mark Caldwell received it. Evelyn Harper sent me a copy, and I read it 4 times, feeling safer each time. The language was clear and firm, stating that Mark Caldwell could not collect my winnings. It mentioned his threat recording, harassment, including visits to my workplace, and that any legal action would be met with a vigorous defense and countersuits. The letter concluded by demanding that Mark Caldwell cease all financial contact with me or face further legal consequences. Everything went quiet for 10 days after the letter arrived. Mark Caldwell did not call, visit or leave any messages for me through my mother. I began to wonder if the legal threat had actually worked. Then my phone started buzzing with texts from my mom. The first one claimed I had turned everything into a legal battle when we should have handled it as a family. The second argued that families should not need lawyers to communicate with one another. The third individual responded, "My father would be so disappointed in how I was treating the people who raised me." Each message felt like a punch in the stomach, even though I knew she was simply repeating what Mark Caldwell had told her to say. I wanted to respond, defend myself, and explain how Mark Caldwell started this by demanding money and threatening to sue me. But I knew from therapy with Lauren Richards that engaging would only perpetuate the cycle. My mother would repeat what I said to Mark Caldwell, who would twist it into something else, and she'd respond with more guilt and manipulation. So I didn't answer any of the texts. I simply screenshotted each one for my documentation file and tried to ignore how much they hurt. Despite the chaos in my family, I threw myself into work, hoping to restore some sense of normalcy. I had a large audit coming up for one of our major clients, so I focused all of my attention on the numbers and spreadsheets. Work had always been my safe haven, the one area of my life where I had complete control and clear boundaries. 3 weeks after the attorney letter, my boss called me into her office, and I assumed someone had complained about my performance or that Mark Caldwell had caused problems here as well. Instead, she offered me a promotion to senior accountant, which included a significant raise and my own team to manage. I sat stunned for a moment before agreeing. She explained that I had earned it through consistent, excellent work and leadership potential, and the firm wanted to invest in my future with them. Walking out of her office, I felt a rush of validation that I had created something real and stable, separate from Mark Caldwell and my mother. My coworkers took me out to celebrate that evening, and for a few hours, I completely forgot about the money drama. We went to a nice restaurant, where they toasted my success while making me laugh with stories about office politics and difficult clients. Daniel Reed kept catching my gaze across the table and smiling, as if he were genuinely proud of me. And I realized I had people in my life who cared about my accomplishments but didn't expect anything from me. The next day, I met with Michael Brooks to talk about long-term financial planning now that I had both the lottery winnings and a higher salary. He suggested creating a trust and investment accounts to secure my financial future in ways that would make my assets virtually unreachable, even if Mark Caldwell could find a lawyer willing to file a frivolous lawsuit. We spent 2 hours discussing options, and I signed paperwork to establish a revocable living trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. Michael Brooks explained that the trust structure provided legal protection and tax benefits while allowing me complete control over the funds. He also assisted me in diversifying my investments across multiple accounts and asset types, ensuring that I was not relying solely on savings. By the time we finished, I had built a financial fortress around everything I'd earned and won. Michael Brooks informed me that even if Mark Caldwell filed a lawsuit, which he doubted any competent attorney would permit, my assets were now protected in ways that would make them legally impossible to touch. I left his office feeling more secure than I had in months, as if I had finally built high enough walls to keep Mark Caldwell out of my life. 4 days later, the doorman at my condo building called my unit over the intercom. He sounded sorry as he told me that my stepfather was in the lobby and had asked to come up. My stomach dropped and I firmly told him not to give Mark Caldwell access under any circumstances. The doorman stated that he understood and would handle it. I stood by my window, staring down at the building entrance and watching Mark Caldwell pace back and forth on the sidewalk. He was gesticulating and clearly arguing with the doorman through the glass doors. The confrontation lasted nearly 12 minutes before Mark Caldwell got back into his truck and drove away. I was shaking when I called the non-emergency police line to file a report. The officer who took my information was courteous and professional, explaining that simply showing up once was insufficient for a restraining order, but documenting the incident created a paper trail in case Mark Caldwell escalated further. I gave him the case number from my harassment documentation and referred to the attorney's cease and desist letter. He said I was doing everything correctly by keeping records and suggested I consider installing security cameras in my unit. After hanging up, I sat on my couch for a long time, trying to relax. Mark Caldwell's arrival at my house felt like a violation, even though he never made it past the lobby. I emailed Evelyn Harper about the incident, and she called me the next morning. She stated that Mark Caldwell was clearly not responding to boundaries and suggested we try one last approach before pursuing a restraining order. She suggested scheduling a mediation session with a professional mediator so that Mark Caldwell, my mother, and I could have a supervised conversation with a neutral third party present. She hoped it would provide closure or at least establish a clear final boundary that even Mark Caldwell couldn't misinterpret. I was skeptical because I didn't believe Mark Caldwell could hold a reasonable conversation, but Evelyn Harper stated, sometimes having an objective professional witness to someone's behavior made it undeniable. I agreed to try, partly because I hoped it would help my mother see the situation more clearly after someone outside the family pointed out Mark Caldwell's unreasonable behavior. Evelyn Harper scheduled the session for the following week at a mediation center in downtown. The mediation session was scheduled for 2:30 p.m. on Thursday. I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in the waiting room, hoping to keep my hands from shaking. My mother arrived next, looking tired and nervous. She gave me a small sad smile but did not attempt to hug me or start a conversation. Then Mark Caldwell walked in, carrying a thick manila folder, his face grimly determined. The mediator introduced herself as an expert in family financial disputes and explained the ground rules. Everyone would have the opportunity to speak without interruption. The goal was to find common ground, and she was there to facilitate, not judge. Mark Caldwell jumped right in before she finished, opening his folder and pulling out pages of handwritten calculations. He claimed he documented everything he spent on me from the age of 13 to 19 and I owed him $52,000. When the mediator asked to see his numbers, Mark Caldwell handed them over proudly, as if he had built an airtight case. She carefully reviewed the pages, her expression neutral before asking Mark Caldwell to explain his methodology. He claimed he had itemized rent, food, utilities, clothing, school supplies, and even calculated the value of the bedroom I used. The mediator looked at me and asked if I had any comments about these calculations. I informed her that I had paid Mark Caldwell $350 per month in rent from the age of 15 to 19, for a total of more than $8,400, and that charging a minor child rent and then itemizing normal parenting expenses was not legally valid. The mediator nodded slowly and informed Mark Caldwell that parents have a legal obligation to provide for their minor children and cannot later seek reimbursement for doing so. My mother began to cry, her shoulders shaking as she pressed tissues to her eyes. She said all she wanted was for her family to get along, and that we couldn't find a solution that would satisfy everyone. The mediator gently inquired as to the nature of her proposed compromise. My mother asked if I could help them with their business debt. I cared about their well-being, but not to the extent that Mark Caldwell desired. I inhaled and calmly explained that being in a relationship after being kicked out at 19 had compromised me. I want to clarify, I'd built my entire adult life without their help or support, and I wasn't obligated to fund Mark Caldwell's failing business just because I got lucky with a lottery ticket. The mediator directly asked Mark Caldwell what he expected from the mediation. Mark Caldwell stated that he desired fairness, that family should support family, and that I possessed too much wealth while they struggled. The mediator demanded a precise definition of fairness. To Mark Caldwell, fair meant acknowledging that my parents made sacrifices to raise me, which I owed them. Something broke within me. Years of being silent and biting my tongue. I told Mark Caldwell that it would have been fair if he had not charged me rent when I was 15 and working 18 hours per week in high school. It would have been fair if he had not kicked me out at 19 with 45 days' notice. He should not have demanded $225,000 of my lottery winnings, as if he was entitled to them. It would have been fair if he hadn't harassed me at work and visited my home after I declined. It would have been more appropriate if he had been a parent rather than a landlord who despised me. The mediator sat back watching us. She made it clear that Mark Caldwell had no legal claim to my lottery winnings and that his actions were harassment. I told her that voluntary family support would not solve the problem. Mark Caldwell stood up abruptly, claiming that the mediator was biased against him and that the meeting was a waste of time. My mother gathered her belongings slowly as Mark Caldwell stormed out when the session ended without a resolution. My mother caught me in the hallway outside the mediation room before I could leave. She requested a moment of privacy. I almost declined, but her expression persuaded me. She twitched her hands nervously while sitting on a building lobby bench. She claimed Mark Caldwell was impossible to live with because I refused to give him money. That he blamed her for raising an ungrateful daughter, and that their marriage was more strained than ever. I expected her to leave him or recognize his wrongdoing, but she simply said she didn't know what to do. She complained that Mark Caldwell was constantly angry and that she was tired of being stuck between us. I gently reassured her that she wasn't in the middle. She chose to stay with someone who was threatening her daughter and attempting to steal my lucky money. She recoiled from stealing but did not deny it. She said marriage was complicated, but I didn't understand. I knew she was putting Mark Caldwell's comfort ahead of my safety and well-being, just like when I was younger. She cried again, saying she wished things were different but couldn't change anything. I stood up and told her I loved her, but I couldn't keep having this conversation in which she acknowledged the problem but refused to change. I left when she nodded and wiped her eyes, knowing that nothing had changed. I drove home several days after mediation. My mother admitted that Mark Caldwell made her life difficult, but her refusal to change has stayed with me. Before entering my condominium, I waited in the garage for 25 minutes. My mother texted me, asking to talk soon. I didn't respond right away. I needed to decide whether a relationship with her was still possible. The following morning, I called her to set up a solo coffee date. She agreed quickly, sounding hopeful and hurting my chest. We met at a cafe between our homes, but Mark Caldwell did not show up. My mother arrived exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and shaky hands while stirring sugar into her coffee. She appeared sad as I waited for her to speak. I loved her and always would, but I couldn't be with her if she allowed Mark Caldwell to harass me. I raised my hand when she protested. I requested one clear boundary. She could contact me directly to develop our relationship, discuss her life, and share her values. Any mention of money, pressure to reconcile with Mark Caldwell, or guilt over my decisions would end the conversation. She asked if I meant it after wiping away tears. I told her I had never been so serious. Despite her shaking voice, she nodded slowly and said she would try. She might not stick with it. After so much time under Mark Caldwell's control, I doubted she could speak without thinking of him. We finished our coffee in awkward silence and exchanged a brief hug in the parking lot before departing. My mother sent me a text that night. Clearly Mark Caldwell sent the message. He wrote that I would regret putting money before family, that karma would catch me, and that I was making my biggest mistake. I immediately took a screenshot of the message and sent it to Evelyn Harper, along with a note about the harassment. Then I blocked my mother's number. I felt guilty for blocking her, but I needed a break from emotional manipulation. The silence was surprisingly peaceful. There were no angry calls, guilt trips, or messages that made me feel like a bad daughter. The silence was heartbreaking because it meant accepting that my mother could not protect our relationship from Mark Caldwell. Using Michael Brooks' new security measures, I spent the weekend cleaning my condo and organizing my finances. I spent the next month constructing my ideal life with my financial security. I took time off work to travel to Ireland, a place I had always wanted to visit but never thought I could afford. I toured ancient castles and listened to live music in small pubs. I hiked along the oceanfront cliffs and ate fresh seafood. I wasn't concerned about money or getting a nicer hotel room. The freedom felt strange, almost wrong, as if I was indulging excessively. However, I reminded myself that I deserved to have this after years of hard work and luck. When I returned, I made more donations to causes that helped me when I was struggling. I stayed at this shelter when I was 20 and in between jobs. A food bank that fed me during my most difficult college months. Full-time community college students scholarship fund. Donating seemed more meaningful than buying myself things. With my luck, I was able to help others in similar situations. After Ireland, I saw Lauren Richards on a regular basis. She asked how I felt about my mother and Mark Caldwell. I told her about blocking my mother's phone number and the strange peace and sadness that resulted. Lauren Richards helped me realize that I had been grieving my mother's loss of a real relationship since I was 19, possibly longer. My family's dysfunction was not caused by lottery winnings. It made the dysfunction unavoidable. I hoped for years that my mother would stand up to Mark Caldwell and we could have a normal mother-daughter relationship. Money made me realize that my hopes were unrealistic. My mother repeatedly selected Mark Caldwell. Lauren Richards inquired about how it felt to stop expecting change. I felt relieved and saddened. Relief that I am no longer waiting for something that will never happen. Grief because accepting reality meant ending my ideal relationship. Real, heavy grief, but also relief. I felt lighter, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't noticed until I dropped it. Several weeks later, I drove across town to visit my 19-year-old roommate's landlady. Margaret Wilson, in her 80s, lived in the same home. She remembered me immediately and invited me to tea when I called. Even though she moved slowly, her mind was alert when I arrived. We drank tea in her kitchen and she inquired about my life. I informed her about my job, condominium, and recent wealth. She smiled and said she was confident I would succeed. I asked how she was doing, and she said the house was becoming disorganized. The roof leaked during heavy rains. Plumbing made unusual sounds. She couldn't afford major repairs with her fixed income, and her children lived out of state. To assist her, I hired contractors to repair her roof and upgrade her plumbing. She cried and hugged me after we finished. She described helping me years ago as one of her best decisions. Her kindness reminded me that our family was more than blood. When I needed them, my family was there. Daniel Reed invited me to lunch one afternoon and mentioned that his sister ran a nonprofit. Allison Moore helped aging foster children and troubled children. Daniel Reed suggested volunteering based on my experience. I paid a visit to Allison Moore's office the following week. She described how the organization encouraged youth independence in a warm and direct manner. They offered housing, job training, financial education, and emotional support. She learned that I was expelled at 19 and worked my way through college. She suggested that my accounting skills and personal experience could help them financially while also mentoring young people. I volunteered 3 nights per week, attending budget planning sessions and updating financial systems. Meeting the children was particularly meaningful. Unaccepting parents expel their children. High schoolers were expected to support themselves. College-bound young adults who work full-time and rent. Their stories mirrored my own struggle. My assistance included budgeting and financial aid applications. My advice included setting boundaries and dealing with difficult family members. Helping them provided me with a purpose beyond safety. I learned to help through survival. A stranger called 4 months after the mediation. Something prompted me to respond. Mom called from a new number. Her voice sounded tired but calmer than it had in months. Mark Caldwell and money were not mentioned. She asked how I was and told me about her garden, where the tomatoes were good but the strawberries had been eaten by squirrels. We talked about daily topics for 25 minutes. My Ireland trip, her book club, and the weather. I felt cautiously optimistic after our first normal conversation in months. I didn't relax, but I appreciated the effort. Before hanging up, my mother mentioned that she was seeing a counselor. She needed help dealing with months of stress. She did not apologize or acknowledge Mark Caldwell's behavior, but she appeared to recognize that the situation was unsustainable. I encouraged her therapy without coercion. She had to grasp things for herself. I couldn't show her something she wasn't prepared for. Allison Moore and I discussed a larger project. I wanted to donate the majority of my lottery winnings to low-income college funds. Her nonprofit could help us find self-sufficient students like myself. The funds cover educational expenses, supplies, application fees, and an emergency fund. Allison Moore's eyes lit up when she heard what I told her. She believed this could change people's lives because many of the students she worked with were intelligent and motivated but lacked college funding. The program's structure and application took several weeks to develop. Nothing else seemed right. My luck turned into an opportunity for others facing similar challenges. 5 months later, Thomas Keller called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing tax returns at work. He expressed relief and regret. Mark Caldwell's landscaping business filed for bankruptcy that morning. Thomas Keller left the partnership 3 months ago, anticipating the financial crisis. He asked me to check on my mother's home. Time was running out for Mark Caldwell to persuade Thomas Keller to mortgage his home for the business. I thanked him for the warning and called Evelyn Harper after we hung up. She showed me county property records online. My mother owned the house solely. No loans, mortgages, or claims. Unfortunately, Mark Caldwell didn't use it as collateral. Knowing that my mother's only asset was safe made me both sad and relieved. However, her life with Mark Caldwell was likely to become more difficult. Mom called 4 days after bankruptcy. She was scared and quiet. Not asking for money. She needed to speak with someone who understood business loss. Mark Caldwell was constantly angry and blaming. After paying off the house, she was concerned about bills and maintaining it. I listened without advice or compensation. I gently reminded her of her options when she paused. She owned the house freehold. By leaving Mark Caldwell, she could ensure my father's final protection. After a long silence, she stated that she was not prepared to think about it. She could decide when, but I understood. After a few more minutes of small talk, she departed. At least I clarified. At the very least she knew. I was content in my condo 7 months after winning the lottery. Evelyn Harper assisted me in establishing solid legal protections. Michael Brooks' financial structures protected me. Lauren Richards' therapy helped me set boundaries without feeling guilty. Allison Moore's nonprofit work gave me purpose. The college fund welcomed 19-year-olds like me. Friends encouraged me, professionals validated my decisions, and I used money wisely. Family conflict can be painful. I still hoped my mother would choose herself over Mark Caldwell. Years of manipulation and control continued to enrage me. I no longer lived for my emotions. They were just a part of my story. After months I believed Lauren Richards' advice. I could not save my mother or change Mark Caldwell. I could only defend myself and assist others in similar circumstances. A lottery win secured my financial future, but it also forced me to stop hoping for change in my family and instead focus on building my life. My strong boundaries made me proud. Mark Caldwell and my mother pressed me, but I proudly refused. Through this, I felt proud of my transformation. For the first time in years I felt optimistic about my future.